morning, everyone. 9:01. I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting of the Recreational Marijuana Establishments Selection Committee to order. I see we have all three of our committee members present. Our first action item is approval of today's agenda. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Support.
Discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The agenda is adopted. Next action item is approval of the minutes. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
I'll support.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 All opposed? The minutes are adopted. Next item on our agenda is communications. Members of the committee, I forwarded communications that were received for the committee from Consano, Mount Pleasant, Dwight Clark with Vincente Cedarburg, Megan Callahan with Policella PLLC, Caleb Carey, and Ryan Jocks with PA Group LLC. Next item on our agenda is public input. If any members of the public joining us today wish to participate in public input, we would ask that you raise your hand either on video or using the raise hand function of Zoom. When recognized, please introduce yourself, and we'd ask that you limit your comments to 5 minutes or less if possible. Are there any members of the public that wish to address the committee?
Not seeing any hands, Jacob. Still letting people in, but it doesn't look like anybody has their hand raised.
All right, I'll give it a moment. Are there any members of the public that wish to address the committee at this time? Are there any members of the public that wish to address the committee at this time? All right, hearing no call for public input, I will close the public input session and we will move on to the scoring of supplemental applications. Before we officially kick this off, I just wanted to take an opportunity to once again express my gratitude to all of our applicants who have worked with us through this process. And thinking back and reflecting on our work with marijuana and marijuana establishments in the city, I think Jeremy, Paul, and myself have been working with some of you for going on 4 years now, maybe even longer, as we've explored the medical marijuana laws, the recreational marijuana laws, and the implementation of the city's ordinances in response to those laws. And so it's been a long road. One thing that I frequently will tell folks, and it's the truth, is that I've been extremely impressed with the professionalism of folks I've encountered in the marijuana industry throughout this process, and by the overwhelming positivity of those interactions through and through. And that includes at the conclusion of our medical marijuana process when, like today, some folks didn't get the outcomes they were looking for, but nevertheless, folks were extremely gracious and pleasant in the aftermath of those decisions. And so I will say for myself, I look forward to working with the three folks today who received their conditional authorizations for retailers. I hope for many others of you, we may have an opportunity to work again in the future, either with a different medical marijuana establishment type, or if the city expands our program in the future, perhaps you'll consider coming back and considering Mount Pleasant as a place to do business. Do we have any other general comments from the committee before I talk a little bit about our process today?
I would echo those comments, Jacob. I agree with that. I won't reiterate all the stuff that you said, but I agree wholeheartedly. The experience has been pleasant, and the interactions have been pleasant. Look forward to seeing how the process ends up and who ends up getting.
This will actually take like 3 hours.
I have nothing to add other than agreement. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Paul. All right, so let's talk a little bit about process. If Jeremy, if you could offer me the ability to share my screen.
Yeah. You want me to make you the host or just turn screen sharing on?
If you just turn screen sharing on, I think I'll be
Okay,
good.
try that. Do you have it now?
I do, thank you. So as you all know, on February 28th, 2020, the city established a deadline for submittals for recreational marijuana establishment applications specific to the application types that were limited licenses under our ordinances. On February 28th, by that date, we received 10 and accepted 10 applications from you all to consider for retailer. Subsequently, June 29th, 2020, we had a deadline for supplemental application materials. All 10 of our prior applicants met that deadline and entered into our supplementary process. On July 10th, 2020, this selection committee called our first meeting to order and discussed how our application process was planned to proceed. On August 12th, we came together with an opportunity to ask additional questions of our applicants to improve our ability to review your supplementary application materials. And as we expressed at that meeting, that was extraordinarily useful and beneficial to the committee in ensuring we were able to do a complete and thorough job of reviewing your application materials. Today, August 21st, 2020 is our scoring meeting. This will be the last meeting of the selection committee. By the end of today's meeting, we will have identified the 3 retailer applicants who will receive a conditional authorization from the city, and we'll look forward to moving forward with those folks as they move through the additional steps towards licensure. The ordinance calls for the city to decide among competing applications through a competitive selection process to select applicants who are best suited to operate in compliance with the MRTMA in the city. The applicants must provide supplemental written information and documentation to the city indicating whether the applicant satisfies each of the following criteria. As we go through today's scoring process, we're going to go category by category. I'll go ahead and read the details of these criteria areas as we go through that process. But nevertheless, as you've all seen in the ordinance, these are the criteria on which the applications will be scored today. Beyond today, after today's meeting, as I mentioned, the folks ranked 1, 2, and 3 will receive a conditional authorization, which is effective today. Final authorization will be contingent on completing the next steps that are outlined in our city recreational marijuana ordinance. Spots 4 through 10 will be placed on a waiting list until those 3 retailers selected today receive their final authorization. If at any point one of those 3 retailers fails to move forward in the process or voluntarily withdraws, we'll go to the next person on that waiting list to offer conditional authorization until we do have 3 retailers fully licensed by the city. If at any point after today, if you're one of the applicants that is ranked 4 through 10, you wish to forfeit your spot on the waiting list, you are eligible to receive a reimbursement of your $5,000 administrative fee that you've all paid, and you can relinquish that spot on the waiting list. If you choose not to do that, you'll remain on that waiting list until the 3rd and final retailer receives their final authorization, at which point any folks remaining on that waiting list at that time will receive that refund of the $5,000 administrative fee automatically, and that waiting list will no longer exist. So with that, if there are no additions from the committee with regard to today's process, let's go ahead and begin scoring.
Sounds good.
So I am going to go ahead and share my screen again. And we will begin with category 1, current medical marijuana facility license status in the city and history of compliance with city and state regulations associated with existing medical marijuana facility licenses held in the city. This is a category that has up to 10 available points. I'm going to go ahead and begin with Stash Ventures. On the basis of the parameters of this category, I have awarded 0 points. Mr. Clerk?
I have awarded 0 points.
Mr. Chief?
I have awarded 0 points.
On the category of marijuana license history, Carry Investments LLC, I have awarded 10 points. Mr. Clerk?
I have awarded 10 points.
Mr. Chief?
I have awarded 10 points.
On the category of marijuana license history, Loom Cannabis Company, Broomfield, I have awarded 0 points. Mr. Clerk,
0.
Mr. Chief.
0.
Category of marijuana license history, Loom Cannabis Company, North Mission Street. I have awarded 0 points. Mr. Clerk,
0.
Mr. Chief.
0.
On the category of marijuana license history for House of Fire provisioning, I have awarded 0 points. Mr. Clerk,
0.
Mr. Chief.
0.
On the category of marijuana license history for GC Flint LLC, I have awarded 0 points. Mr. Clerk,
0.
Mr. Chief.
0.
On the category of marijuana license history for Northeast Services, I have awarded 6 points. Mr. Clerk,
I have awarded 7.
Mr. Chief.
I did 5.
On the category of marijuana license history, CJO Services LLC, I have awarded.
Wait. I'm sorry. My spreadsheet. I'm sorry. 7 points for me.
All right. For Northeast Services, marijuana license history.
Just a second here. I'm following. 7 points. Yes.
Thank you, sir. On the category of marijuana license history for CJO Services LLC, I have awarded 6 points.
7 for me.
Mr. Chief.
I did 7.
On the category of marijuana license history, Green Peak Industries, I have awarded 0 points. Mr. Clerk.
0. Sorry, 0.
And I'm 0.
And on the category of marijuana license history, Pure Relief and Union LLC, I have awarded 0 points. Mr. Clerk.
0.
Mr. Chief.
0.
All right. If I could have members of the committee review those points under your initials to ensure I have accurately reflected your point allocations before we move forward to discussion.
Looks good.
Yes. And I got my ruler out so that I can follow it across. So
Do we have any discussion on this category before moving forward?
I will say, it's a fairly black and white category. So it's fairly black and white. So.
Agree.
Absolutely. I would agree. I approached it. It was clear we were looking at history with the applicants, and clearly that's a short list of folks that are licensed operators in the city currently, and our experience and duration of those experiences differs among those who are licensed, and so I awarded those points accordingly. All right, our second category. Background of the applicant, including past ownership interest in a business or businesses operating in the state of Michigan, past compliance with business licensing requirements, including marijuana business licenses issued by Laura, and residency in the city or Isabella County for at least 1 year. This is a 10-point category. Do we have any conversation about this category before we begin scoring?
Nothing yet from me.
I will just offer that this is one of those instances where I would say I'm very impressed by the diversity and breadth of business experience that exists among our applicant pool. I felt this is one category where there was a great deal of parity among the applicants, folks who have extensive business experiences outside the marijuana industry, folks who have extensive business experience within the marijuana industry, and some folks that happen to have both. And so I felt that everyone obviously is pre-qualified by the state of Michigan. They've met certain minimum standards in terms of character under those criteria. And I think my scores will reflect the fact that there was a great deal of consistency and folks were similarly matched on this category from my perspective.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
I would say just a reminder to anyone who's listening that reminder there will be fractional points. I know some of mine on this category especially are fractional points.
Yes, and I will ask the committee in the event that you do have fractional points to offer that you please be especially attentive to my data entry to ensure I've captured what you have awarded correctly as we proceed. As we mentioned before, I took the same approach on some of these factors in terms of looking at proportionally and contextually amongst the applicants who I felt merited perhaps a few more points on certain elements of these categories. If there's no further discussion, we can move on to scoring. So for the category of applicant background, we'll begin with Stash Ventures, LLC. I have awarded 7 points. Mr. Clerk?
6.66.
And Mr. Chief?
I did 5.
On the category of applicant background, Carry Investments, LLC, I have awarded 8 points. Mr. Clerk?
8.33.
Mr. Chief?
I did 6.
On the category of applicant background, Loom Cannabis Company, Broomfield, I have awarded 7 points. Mr. Clerk?
6.66.
Mr. Chief?
I did 7.
On the category of applicant background, Loom Cannabis Company, North Mission Street, I have awarded 7 points. Mr. Clerk?
6.66.
Mr. Chief?
7.
On the category of applicant background, House of Fire Provisioning, I have awarded 7 points. Mr. Clerk?
6.66.
Mr. Chief?
7 points.
On the category of applicant background, GC Flint LLC, I have awarded 7 points. Mr. Clerk?
6.66.
Mr. Chief?
I did 6.
On the category of applicant background, Northeast Services, I have awarded 7 points. Mr. Clerk?
6.66.
Mr. Chief?
I did 6 points.
All right, when Jeremy starts reading pie, I will be cutting you off. On the category of applicant background, CJO Services LLC, I have awarded 7 points. Mr. Clerk?
6.66.
Mr. Chief?
I did 7 points.
On the category of applicant background, Green Peak Industries, I have awarded 7 points. Mr. Clerk?
6.66.
Mr. Chief?
7 points.
On the category of applicant background, Pure Relief and Union LLC, I have awarded 6 points. Mr. Clerk?
6.99.
Mr. Chief?
7 points.
Any conversation about those scores? If I can have the committee just confirm that their scores are represented accurately on the screen.
Can you just give me a minute or two?
Yeah, absolutely. Take your time. Let me know when
Okay.
you're ready to proceed.
Six, 7. I'm a little gun shy now because of my first mistake I mentioned, so I'm just bear with me.
No problem. I want to take this slowly so that we do get this data entered correctly and don't make any errors. So I'd prefer we are certain before we move on to our next category.
Mine look okay.
And I'd also just like to add to the committee, if at any point we encounter a scoring situation where you have a question about another committee member's score, please feel free to ask that question if you want to dig into where we may have some differential scoring as we move forward. Don't hesitate to ask those questions. And by the same token, if as a result of that conversation you want to make any adjustments to your scores, please let me know so that we can do that before moving forward.
Mine are good. Thank you.
Mr. Clerk, are you ready to proceed?
Yep.
Wonderful. Our next category is human resources, including the number of full-time equivalent employees. This is a 10-point category. We will start with our first applicant, Stash Ventures LLC. I have awarded 5 points. Mr. Clerk?
5.
Mr.
4
Four.
for
On the-
Stash.
For Stash Ventures LLC,
Yep.
Human Resources.
Yep.
The category of Human Resources for Carry Investments LLC, I have awarded 4 points. Mr. Clerk?
6.
Mr. Chief?
5
On the category of Human Resources, Loon Cannabis Company, Broomfield, I have awarded 9 points. Mr. Clerk?
10.
Mr. Chief?
I did 10.
On the category of Human Resources, Loon Cannabis Company, North Mission, I have awarded 9 points. Mr. Clerk?
10.
Mr.
10.
10. On the category of Human Resources, House of Fire Provisioning, I have awarded 10 points. Mr. Clerk?
8.
Mr. Chief?
I did 8.
On the category of Human Resources, GC Flint LLC, I have awarded 10 points. Mr. Clerk?
8.
Mr. Chief?
8.
On the category of Human Resources, Northeast Services, I have awarded 10 points. Mr. Clerk?
6.
Mr. Chief?
I did 7.
On the category of Human Resources, CJO Services LLC, I have awarded 10 points. Mr. Clerk?
5.
Mr. Chief?
I did 7.
On the category of Human Resources, Green Peak Industries, I have awarded 6 points. Mr. Clerk?
3.
Mr. Chief?
4.
On the category of Human Resources, Pure Relief and Union LLC, I have awarded 7 points. Mr. Clerk?
6.
Mr. Chief?
I did 5.
All right, any discussion on the Human Resources category?
Just, I need a minute.
Absolutely. I'll say for my part, we were presented with a variety of details on human resources, some more focused on employee policies and procedures, some more focused on employee benefits, pay structures, some with very little detail with regard to human resources planning. And I think that for me, that's reflective in these scores of trying to look at job creation, livable wages, benefits that are being offered, staff and employment that's occurring here in the city of Mount Pleasant, specifically at these establishments. And so that for me was driving my allocations of points among these competing applicants. I will say I'm happy to see that we don't have any applicants that are proposing to pay a minimum wage to any of their employees. Everyone was proposing to pay some sort of living wage, and I believe most folks referenced some sort of benefits that were going to be made available to their employees. So that's certainly appreciated, and we recognize that all of these folks will be creating jobs at some level within Mount Pleasant if selected, which is of course wonderful news. Any other discussion on this category? Are we all good with the recording of those points?
No, I think it's good. I would just say it was, when I did all of my categories, and this was one of them, I certainly did a lot of comparative analysis as I read through them, the second, third time, to finally do my points, comparing them one to the other was how I tried to base a lot of those points.
Same for me, absolutely. There's no further discussion. We can move to our next category. Physical investment, including the applicant's proposed tangible capital investment, the current and proposed condition of the proposed location, and the applicant's ownership stake in the physical location of the establishment. This is a 20-point category. Do we have any discussion about the category before we proceed to scoring?
It is for me. You look at what the proposal is, and the capital, the physical capital investment. And I guess my question is it's not built yet. I mean, how do you know that it's going to be adhered to? That was where
Right.
I mean, I'm redoing my bathroom, and there was a tangible physical investment, and I've had to alter course because of so I downgraded fixtures and everything else. I know things come up, and for me, if it's all on paper, it does. It looks good. And I'm very excited about some of the renditions, which were very helpful. So I think my points will reflect that. But for me, it was difficult, especially for such a high point category.
Absolutely. I will say, obviously, components of this category, such as the ownership stake of the physical location, that was the easy part here, because that's black and white, whether or not there's ownership or proposed ownership and what the percentage of that ownership is. I would agree, Paul, with the fact that in terms of the fiscal investment, we all know that going out to get a bid on a project in this current climate, those numbers could vary dramatically. I was heartened, though. I guess I would say my approach was to generalize those numbers into whose levels of investment were highest, sort of in the middle and sort of on the low end, knowing that those numbers are likely to move, but they're not likely to move at the magnitudes that would affect those positionings relative to each other. And so my scoring, again, was largely going to reflect that. And then the wild card here, I think, is the current state of the property. And obviously, it should go without saying, some of these proposed locations are essentially derelict, obsolete, eyesore locations currently, and some of them are not. So the impact potential of redevelopment of some of these properties is just inherently greater than others. And so that obviously is also going to factor in among those other components of the criteria to affect the final scoring.
I am, again, I look at this category as immensely important. All of them are important, but for me, well, we're going to have to see how the scoring comes out. And I would like to discuss, if possible, major discrepancies. I mean, you don't know how hard it was for me not to reach out to you guys because I know that isn't allowed. But I'm sitting here in my office looking at these things, and it was tough. It was tough because I mean, you're looking at a public safety director, not a capital investment guy.
Absolutely.
So I
agree with. I was to say I agree with what you were saying, Jacob. And I guess the question I would have, because I'm not 100% sure, and you were a little bit more involved in the initial crafting of this ordinance, but there's a section in the ordinance too where these applicants, to some degree, get bound to what they're saying, Paul. So they'll be signing an agreement saying basically they've committed to do what they said they were going to do. So I don't know if that kind of answers your question a little bit, but it's some things will change, obviously. But
yeah,
to some degree, what we're seeing will be relatively what we see based on that agreement.
Yeah.
And I've been around long enough to realize, like you said, things do come up, and then they ask for, I'm probably not using this term right, but they ask for a variance because it isn't economically feasible. And I get it. I get the economics of it. I get that there's more than one way to do things and achieve the same result. So I know this, that we, contrary to popular belief, we like to work with our businesses to make them or as successful as possible, and that includes in the initial investment of construction and whatnot. So,
Sure. If it gives you any solace, Paul, I will tell you, I professionally, I think I'm the person on the committee that's most involved in the ramifications of this category. And so in looking at the plans submitted, in large part, the plans are compliant with city codes and ordinances as prepared and presented in these application packages. That's not true of all, but that was true of most. And I think in large part, the proposals are consistent with typical business proposals for redevelopment. So they seemed, to the extent we can know this at this point, realistic in nature. I didn't see anything on any plan beyond a few things that may not be code compliant that would be hard to believe could be accomplished by a business that's capitalized in the manner that these folks are. So I'm confident between our existing codes and ordinances that will apply to these applicants as they would any other business in the city, combined with the agreements Jeremy referenced, that we will be successful in seeing the proposals selected come to fruition in largely the same manner that they're proposed today.
Yeah, and again, I appreciate that, and I do appreciate you guys at least kind of understanding where I'm coming from. And like I said, the biggest thing is I wanted to reach out to you guys and ask questions, and I know that obviously that isn't appropriate, so I didn't do it. But I'm doing it today, and
Absolutely.
I feel better. So
good. And I would agree, as we go through this, like with any other category, as we go through this, if you have questions with regard to someone else's point allocation, or the result of this conversation causes you to rethink your own point allocation, let's go ahead and have that conversation before we move on to our next category. So if there's no further discussion before scoring, we can begin with the scoring of the physical investment category, again, a 20-point category. Our first applicant, Stash Ventures LLC, I've awarded 16 points. Mr. Clerk?
18.
Mr. Chief?
Hold on, I got to get ready here. You said we're on Stash, just a second. Sorry.
Yeah. Stash Ventures LLC, physical investment.
I have 19 points.
All right. Physical investment, Carry Investments LLC, I have awarded 12 points. Mr. Clerk?
12.
Mr. Chief?
I have down 8.
On the category of physical investment, Loon Cannabis Company, Broomfield, I have awarded 13 points. Mr. Clerk?
14.5.
Mr. Chief?
I have 18 points.
On the category of physical investment, Loon Cannabis Company, North Mission, I have awarded 8 points. Mr. Clerk?
9.
Mr. Chief?
I have 18 points.
On the category of physical investment, House of Fire Provisioning, I've awarded 11 points. Mr. Clerk?
17.
Mr. Chief?
I have 13 points.
On the category of physical investment, GC Flint LLC, I have awarded 9 points. Mr. Clerk?
13.75.
I have 10 points.
On the category of physical investment, Northeast Services, I have awarded 16 points. Mr. Clerk?
13.5.
Mr. Chief?
I have 12 points.
On the category of physical investment, CJO Services LLC, I have 1 point. Mr. Clerk?
4.
Mr. Chief?
I have 12.
On the category of physical investment, Green Peak Industries, I have awarded 10 points. Mr. Clerk?
6.
Mr. Chief?
I have 10.
On a category of physical investment, Pure Relief and Union, I have awarded 16 points. Mr. Clerk?
18.5.
Mr. Chief.
I have 11.
All right, guys, we got a little bit of discrepancy here. That's okay. We have a diverse committee for a reason. But I do want to ask if is there any conversation about point allocations for these specific applications where we maybe have more variance that you'd like to discuss? Let's see. So it looks like some of those larger variances, we've got a little bit of a variance here with Loom Cannabis North Mission. Looks like on CGO Services, we've got another relatively large spread of points. Is there any, we certainly can leave things as is, the categories in the eye of the beholder, but is there anything that you'd like to discuss? I mean, I can say, I guess I'll start. You know, I looked at the 3 subcomponents of this category, and as I said, you know, at least a portion of my points had to do with the applicant's potential ownership of the property. And we have a mix of folks who will be sole owner, folks partial owner, and folks that will be not the owner. And so that, at least for my 10 applicant points, across the 10 applicants, my point totals are going to vary because some folks received no points in that regard, and some folks received more points for being complete full owners of their proposed property. The same thing on the condition. So just, you know, in particular, you know, on the to go to the Loom North Mission, you know, they're not proposing to be the owner of the property. The current condition is it's a vacant parcel of land. So I think adding to the tax rolls and putting a quality development there is a huge improvement.
Yeah.
So I awarded them, you know, full points in that regard. And in terms of the capital investment, it was actually in the low end compared to some of our other applicants. And so they got a little bit less points for me in that regard in terms of the capital investment, because comparatively it wasn't on the high end of those proposals.
But for me, I mean, when I looked at it, yeah, it's vacant and it's good for the city. The location is good. I mean, so that's why I ranked it so high. I like but again, I like the idea of refurbing a building.
Sure.
Like the graphic or the old Graphic Central location. I don't know if that's inappropriate to, I mean, that building is not ugly as it sits per se. So I mean, yeah, it's going to be nice, but again, I don't know. This category was difficult, and I don't know if it was difficult because I don't know a whole lot about it, or if I viewed it because it was a 20-point category that, you know, this one's really important. And so I'm probably just getting myself into.
I think there's room for us to disagree on this one, as there are in all the categories. We're all going to have our own perception of the proposals and their relative nature to each other. And I think that's wholly appropriate. That's why we don't have a one-person committee, because we're bringing that diversity of viewpoints here. And I don't think there's one right way to do this. So I'm not, I will say I'm not troubled by disagreement on these scores. I think I'd be confused if we were all in agreement on every point. I think by and large, I'm seeing that the trend line is that we are generally seeing the same things, which is reassuring that we've done our jobs, but there are going to be points of disagreement, and I'm comfortable with those. within a 20-point category with multiple factors, we're going to prioritize those factors a little bit differently and holistically look at them and apply our own judgment. So does anyone want to adjust a score as a result of seeing the other scores or this conversation?
No, I would just add, like we were talking about there, where there are some discrepancies, I certainly did as you did, where, the applicant's taking a physical location played a role in that, whether it was up or down for me, because that's something that's pretty black and white typically, and was often, and most of the time, I think in every proposal spelled out. So that played a pretty big role for me in this category. And then I just tried to differentiate from that point on the actual investment and what the transformation of the property would end up being, and also the amount that was being put into those facilities. So all those things affect tax base and everything else that go into that. So that's kind of some of the stuff that I use to get some of my numbers and comparing one to the other as far as tangible investment, which was sometimes difficult to decipher and pick out in the different places, but just dug into those and tried to find where it was that money was being spent on the physical locations, and that's kind of how I came up with my points.
Well, if there's no desire to adjust any points, I would ask if the committee members could just review the entry of their point totals on the sheet on the screen to ensure that I've captured them correctly. And then if so, we can move on to our next category.
Should have made us all different colors, Jacob.
Yeah, I'm realizing that. It's no, definitely pay attention to my data entry as I'm entering it too, and hopefully between those two checks we'll have a comfort level. We'll do one last check at the end as well, just to make sure everyone's where they believe they intended to be.
Okay.
Mine look okay.
All right, our next category, area impact, including proximity of the establishment to properties zoned or used residentially, and plans for litter control, loitering, neighborhood outreach, noise mitigation, odor mitigation, resident safety, and traffic mitigation. This is a 10-point category. Do you have any discussion about the category before we move into scores?
Yeah, I wish this was a 20-point category because I feel like I have a better handle, at least in my mind. I feel like I'm better suited to rate this than most.
I can appreciate that. I will say, I mean, there are elements of this that are in the kind of planning world. I think even in the clerk world, there's a lot of work that has to do with mitigating impacts on the community through licensing and other activities. Similar to the physical investment category, portions of this category are kind of immutable factors. The actual location relative to other uses in the community isn't something the applicant can actually affect or change. So I just simply looked at where they were located relative to residential uses and offered points accordingly. Beyond that, in my impression, most of the applicants provided plans that touched on most, if not all, of these categories. Most of those plans I thought were really well thought out, and I was generally pretty impressed with the attention to detail in those plans. Some applicants, I will say, I think didn't address these areas either in part or in whole, which I was surprised by because I thought this was a fairly easy category that anyone could participate in this category on an equal playing field to discuss how they would, essentially be a good neighbor. I think is what this category comes down to, is how are you going to be a good neighbor to those around you.
That's what I would say too, that, it was surprising that some didn't have anything addressing certain issues in some of this category, because it's so many different kind of bullet points in this category. But I also tried to look at whether like the level that it was addressed in. So if it was, just a one-word statement like, oh, yep, we're going to do that. For me, it wasn't worth as many points as saying, we're going to do that, and here's the actual plan and the 20 ways that we're going to address it and the things we're going to do to actually implement. So I weighted those accordingly based on the level of response as well.
Absolutely. If there are no further comments on the category, we'll begin with scoring. Area Impact Stash Ventures LLC, I've awarded 3 points. Mr. Clerk?
5.
Mr. Chief?
I did 5.
On the area, criteria Area Impact Carry Investments LLC, I have awarded 5 points. Mr. Clerk?
5.
Mr. Chief?
I did 2.
On the category of Area Impact Loon Cannabis Company Broomfield, I've awarded 6 points. Mr. Clerk?
7.
Mr. Chief?
I did 9.
On the category of Area Impact Loon Cannabis Company North Mission, I've awarded 9 points. Mr. Clerk?
9.
Mr. Chief?
I did 10.
On the category of Area Impact House of Fire Provisioning, I have awarded 10 points. Mr. Clerk?
7.
Mr. Chief?
I did 10.
On the category of Area Impact GC Flint LLC, I've awarded 9 points. Mr. Clerk?
5.
Mr. Chief?
I did 7.
On the category of Area Impact Northeast Services, I've awarded 7 points.
Yep.
Mr. Clerk?
5.
Mr. Chief?
I did 7.
On the category of Area Impact CGO Services LLC, I've awarded 10 points. Mr. Clerk?
8.
Mr. Chief?
I did 7.
On the category of Area Impact Green Peak Industries, I've awarded 2 points. Mr. Clerk?
4.
Mr. Chief?
I did 5.
On the category of Area Impact Pure Relief and Union LLC, I've awarded 7 points. Mr. Clerk?
7.
Mr. Chief?
I did 5.
All right. Got our scores up on the screen. You know, as I said, for me, some of this was, you know, for facilities that are more distant from residential and less likely to have neighborhood impacts. That just, it is what it is. There's that was kind of baked in. Some folks who are proximate though to residential had really compelling plans on how they were going to outreach neighborhoods, and some of those folks have done that outreach already. And I appreciate the folks who've been proactive. Certainly, the proactiveness didn't weigh directly into my scoring, but nevertheless, I appreciated that folks were willing and interested to reach out and let folks know that they were pursuing this in our community. And then again, some folks just didn't address these points in a way.
Was that me?
No, I missed. Yeah, there we go.
Can we talk about Pure Relief for a second here?
Yeah.
I don't know what you said other than abutting residential. The big thing for me was parking. And I did not, I don't know, because I just flipped to the page and I looked and I totally missed the parking lot across that they have in their proposal. I don't know how I missed it, but I wasn't impressed with the parking at the site, not considering the parking lot that they have proposed.
Yeah, 'cause they're proposing quite a big addition of parking there behind the building, if I remember right.
Across the street.
They don't have any alley adjacent parking. It's some street side parking that currently exists that they're proposing to improve. I will be subject to review and approval by our public works folks. But they do own a parking lot that's across Lincoln
Yep.
Street, adjacent to the bank property. Paul, are you on the basis of that, are you wanting to adjust that score?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I'll let you have a moment to think on that. If everybody wants to take a moment and check your scores, and then Paul, when we're done with the score check, if you want to get back with me on any adjustment you want to make on that, if you think that'll give you enough time to think it through, take your time, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, my scores are right. I mean, they're up there, right?
So are mine.
Yeah, mine as well.
What I have to tell you, in this, the unsettled, one of the things that stuck in my head with pure relief was their close proximity to a bank. And I know if you're in the banking business, you get a little nervous with loitering, and they're going to have to be very diligent. The neighborhood that abuts there, some of those letters eased my concern, but again, you're not going to know the impact until it's up and running, and it's kind of like when we do ordinances. Nobody comes for the public input. Nobody does this, and then when the first person gets cited, it becomes a big issue. In being that my score was lower because I thought, well, where are these people going to park? I want to adjust mine to I'll adjust it to a 7.
Okay.
Because if they're hanging out in their own parking lot, and I'm not saying that it's just unique to them. I don't want any. I just yeah, I want to adjust it to a 7. I think that's fair, and I apologize for my oversight.
No problem, Mr. Chief. That's why we're having this conversation today. I'll say, to agree with some of your comments. There were the locations that abut or are across an alley from a residential area naturally give me pause, because I think that they create the circumstances most conducive to problems. And because these are new to our community, we can't predict what those problems will be. And we can't ensure with any business that every operator is going to operate that business consistent with our community's priorities and our expectations. And that's as true for a restaurant, as a cell phone store, as a marijuana retailer. Some folks are going to follow the rules and be good neighbors, and some folks aren't. What I will say, so to the extent for that particular applicant, for the extent that their point total isn't maybe as high as it would otherwise be with me, it was because of that location. However, I was very impressed with their plans in this category. I thought they were actually some of the best plans of all of the applicants' plans. And I really appreciated how thoroughly they had addressed that.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if that was just because it's a criteria or because they anticipated that would be a concern from this committee because of that location. But that significantly mitigated my concerns. And if not for their physical location still being where it is adjacent to a neighborhood, I may have considered more points just on the basis of the quality of the plans. So is everyone else, are we all satisfied with our scores otherwise?
Yeah, the only thing I wanted to add to in light of that is obviously the odor part, but I was educated in our last meeting about it being packaging off site that controls a lot of the odor. And so I've had to readjust my logic, so to speak, on the because I really am concerned about the odor, but that went away after last meeting. So,
Yeah. And I think, I've always believed that our applicants have all the incentive in the world to operate these establishments in accordance with the law, and perhaps to be some of our best business partners because of the nature of the industry. And I also know that our community will hold these establishments to high standards, and that we won't tolerate bad behavior, and that we won't accept poor performance. And so I hope our applicants are prepared for those high expectations if they're selected today, because they do exist. And I think they exist universally, both within our city departments, but also within our community and our residents. All right, our next category, business operations, including a business plan, financing plan, marketing and promotion plan, with an emphasis on reducing exposure to minors, and strategic plan. This is a 10-point category. Do we have any conversation about this category before we move forward? I'll start. I'll say I think many applicants provided very detailed plans, including projections of revenue and budgets, address some of the challenges facing the industry, both in terms of obtaining a supply of product, some of the vertical integration activities that are going on throughout the state, some of the tax burdens that this industry faces because of the nature of the industry. And it gave me more confidence in most cases that the applicants were prepared and able to open, operate, and serve our community in the manner our city commission has asked us to ensure through this process. Like the last category, I was surprised that some applicants really failed to provide the details to back up this area in terms of a solid plan for business and financing and their strategy moving forward. And even things as simple as the marketing plans. I thought some of these applicants had outstanding plans to address minor exposure. They really thought of many creative ways to address that concern. And I thought other applicants seemed to address only the bare minimums under the MRA's rules, if at all. And so, again, easy points left on the table, but that definitely weighed into my allocation of points. I thought several outstanding plans, a few a little weaker, and then a few that were really lacking in details for me.
Yeah, I would agree. There were some pretty extensive plans in there that were very impressive as far as, financial planning out several years, and strategic planning, and pieces of the marketing that were very, very impressive, and even examples of the types of marketing. And so I was impressed by those. And then, like you said, there were some that just had like a bare minimum. So those points I awarded based on those things.
All right, if there's no further discussion, we'll begin with scoring for the business operations category. Stash Ventures LLC, I've awarded 1 point. Mr. Clerk?
4.
Mr. Chief?
I did 3.
On the category of business operations, Carry Investments LLC, I've awarded 3 points. Mr. Clerk?
4.
Mr. Chief?
I did 4.
On the category of business operations, Loom Cannabis Company Broomfield, I've awarded 9 points. Mr. Clerk?
9.
Mr. Chief?
I've awarded 10.
On the category of business operations, Loom Cannabis Company North Mission, I've awarded 9 points. Mr. Clerk?
9.
Mr. Chief?
I did 10.
On the category of business operations, House of Fire Provisioning, I've awarded 9 points. Mr. Clerk?
9.
Mr. Chief?
I did 10.
On the category of business operations, GC Flint LLC, I've awarded 9 points. Mr. Clerk?
9.
Mr. Chief?
I did 9.
On the category of business operations, Northeast Services, I've awarded 10 points. Mr. Clerk?
5.5.
Mr. Chief?
I did 7.
On the category of business operations, CGO Services LLC, I've awarded 10 points. Mr. Clerk,
5.5.
Mr. Chief.
I did 8.
On the category of business operations, Green Peak Industries, I've awarded 6 points. Mr. Clerk,
5.
Mr. Chief.
I did 8.
On the category of business operations, Pure Relief and Union LLC, I've awarded 9 points. Mr. Clerk,
9.
Mr. Chief.
I did 7.
All right, any discussion on these points?
I had a number of perfect 10s in there. And if you look at those applications, it was the attention to detail that I appreciated. And from who's going to be on site, closing procedures, security, lighting, all those things, onboarding, the system of checks and balances. I've never run a business before, but I have managed people, and you really, again, in my mind, you really have to have the persistence and attention to detail every day to get the outcome that is desired at the end of the day. And the ones that I gave 10s to, I felt were very detailed, and I appreciated that.
Agree.
I'd like to, I guess, one point where we had some spread, and I just wanted to provide some recognition. I felt that the marketing plans for Northeast Services and CGO Services LLC, with regard to their approach to minimizing minor exposure, I thought was very impressive. That was one of the early notes I made. It's in tab 30, Paul. As I went through, my approach overall with this review, I started with applicant number 1 and worked my way to applicant number 10. And as everyone knows, that's thousands of pages of information. And as I saw things that troubled me, or things that I felt were incomplete, or things that struck me as being really good, I made a note. That happened to be one of the things I made a note on that I thought was great and very impressive. And I would say ultimately, if one of those 2 applicants isn't in our top 3, I would encourage our selected applicants to reach out to those folks and ask them about their plans for minor exposure prevention, because I really thought they had the best plan in that regard. That's only one small component of this category, but I just wanted to highlight that, because for me, I thought it was a good marketing plan, and I really appreciated that they put a lot of thought into that particular element of it. Do we have any other conversation about point allocations in this category? Or do we want to go ahead and check our scores and make sure that they were entered correctly before we move on?
I think all mine are good, but I'll check again here.
Mine are all good.
I have binders open, and
Mine are good.
mine are good.
All right. Our next category, establishment design, including the provision of glazing, landscaping, and screening above city minimum requirements, the use of durable building materials, compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act, and implementation of crime prevention through environmental design or CPTED principles. This is a 10-point category. Any discussion on this category before we start with scoring?
Did you guys think that a picture is worth 1,000 words?
It helps.
Okay, good.
I will say for this category, this is another one where I felt some applicants just left some of these sub-components unaddressed completely, or address them very minimally, and other applicants really paid attention to the criteria and thoroughly addressed their plans for them. And that, I think, that's probably the biggest component in the spread of points in this category for me, was whether or not people read the criteria and applied it. Did people read our ordinances to see what our minimums were and then propose things that exceeded those minimums? So it's very clear in this language that it's above city minimum requirements. Some of these applications don't even meet the minimum requirements of the city ordinances, so it's not possible to provide points for me from that perspective. I would also just say, like, a few, and we can get into more detail after we score, but a few of these applicants I thought did an amazing job. Either
Down
with
to the species of tree.
Yeah, their site plan, very thorough, very detailed, and in alignment with city codes. And I thought some of these applicants did an outstanding job with the CPTED elements. I think it's very easy for folks to say, oh, crime prevention, we've got cameras.
Yeah.
We've got lights. And I think that there's a lot more to CPTED than that, and cameras and lights. And it's a lot more about how are you influencing behavior through the design of your facility. And some of our applicants really went into amazing detail about how they plan to do that, and their plans aligned with those details. So
I would agree. It was obvious that some applicants took this category very seriously and spent time and money developing plans and doing research and putting together very detailed proposals of site plans that they may or may not end up using based on the selection process. So I was happy to see that some applicants took this very, very seriously, and my points reflect that.
We have no further discussion on the category. We can begin with scoring. For Establishment Design, Stash Ventures LLC, I've awarded 1 point. Mr. Clerk?
6.5.
Mr. Chief?
I did 4.
On the category of Establishment Design, Carey Investments LLC, I've awarded 5 points. Mr. Clerk?
5.5.
Mr. Chief?
I did 5.
On the category of Establishment Design, Loon Cannabis Company, Broomfield, I've awarded 10 points.
Yep.
Mr. Clerk?
9.
Mr. Chief?
I got 10 for both of them.
On the category of Establishment Design, Loom Cannabis Company, North Mission, I have awarded 10 points. Mr. Clerk?
9.
Mr. Chief?
10.
On the category of Establishment Design, House of Fire Provisioning, I've awarded 8 points. Mr. Clerk?
9.
Mr. Chief?
9.
On the category of Establishment Design, GC Flint LLC, I've awarded 8 points. Mr. Clerk?
8.5.
Mr. Chief?
7.
On the category of Establishment Design, Northeast Services, I've awarded 4 points. Mr. Clerk?
3.
Yep. 3.
3. On the category of Establishment Design, CGO Services LLC, I've awarded 4 points. Mr. Clerk?
3.
Mr. Chief?
4.
On the category of Establishment Design, Green Peak Industries, I have awarded 0 points.
Yep.
Mr. Clerk?
2.
Mr. Chief?
Yeah, I did 2.
On the category of Establishment Design, Pure Relief and Union, I've awarded 10 points. Mr. Clerk?
9.5.
Mr. Chief?
I did 9.
All right. Any discussion on the Establishment Design category?
Again, the pictures, the attention to detail here. If you want to talk, it was just this was one of the easiest categories for me to score.
I will agree. I mean, this is, of course, right in the heart of my daily work, dealing with reviewing site plans and architectural renderings. I won't say it was the easiest part, even though that is in my wheelhouse. Simply, maybe perhaps because it is in my wheelhouse, and I had to maintain an open mind. This isn't a site plan review process, and understandably, every detail of these projects and plans isn't going to be perfect or in exact alignment with our codes and ordinances. But to me, it spoke of, the renderings, of course, help understanding, but it was very clear who had done their research and who hadn't, and who had read the criteria and who hadn't. And then among those that had done a great job of reviewing those criteria and addressing those criteria, it was just a matter of, who did a better job, and there's slight differentials. On this category, I'd have to give a great deal of credit to the architectural folks who worked with Loon Cannabis Company.
Yeah.
I thought they just did an outstanding job of preparing this application. My recollection is that they're the only company that made contact with the planning and building offices to find out what the minimum requirements of the city were.
Really?
And I think it showed in the quality of their end product. I'd also would give a lot of credit to Pure Relief and Union. I thought their septed plans were, again, excellent, very well thought out. I thought their ADA plans, they were talking about preventing trip hazards and providing for accessibility within the retail footprint of the store. I thought it was just tremendous attention to detail. And although they didn't make contact with the city planning office, to my knowledge, they did do their research about our ordinances. I don't think they interpreted them 100% correctly in every instance, but they clearly sought out the information, and I give them a lot of credit for doing that.
Yeah, there was a tremendous amount of detail in those ones that you were just speaking about, and I think that reflects in our points. And I'm just happy, I don't know about you, Paul, but I'm happy to see on this one, since Jacob does do this for a living, that we at least got close to his points on most of them. So
Well, and he had the luxury of knowing that they reached out. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
It doesn't, but I agree. And to me, when I looked at this category, I felt myself going back to the physical investment portion. And what I mean by that is, when you look at the amount of money that's being invested and you get the end product that's being presented, I found myself, well, geez, if somebody's investing 10 million, it's gotta be unbelievable. But you see what can be done with even a small amount. So or a smaller amounts, I guess I should say. So that's what I having to go back to and whatnot. So.
Well, if I could have everybody check their scores.
Oh yeah.
Sure they're entered correctly before we move on to our second to last category.
second to last.
Yep, second to last. Yep. Gonna have everybody out of here by dinner time.
Yep, mine are correct.
Mine are good.
Excellent. All right, let's move on to our next category. Energy efficiency, including Energy Star certification, Michigan Energy Code compliance, use of energy from carbon-free sources, and use of WaterSense fixtures. This is a 10-point category. Any discussion about the category before we move into scoring?
No, like you said before, there were, most people did a pretty good job. There were definitely some that missed a couple things on this one. I think that would have been easy to get some points. So I think there's some plans that could have been better from that perspective, but I thought everybody did a a pretty decent job on this category. There were some that shined out that had a level of detail that was not even close to some of the other ones. So I appreciate that, and the importance of energy efficiency and taking it seriously and doing things to help that entire kind of realm of this category was appreciated.
Absolutely. I think there's always chatter about these criteria and their applicability to the end mission, but I think not only does running in an efficient manner, is it environmentally friendly? Is it potentially more friendly to the neighbors in the city infrastructure? But I think it also makes your business more resilient. And I think thinking about those things and demonstrating that you are in your business operations thinking about how can I shelter my business from an energy shock in the future? How can I ensure that my operations are sustainable if the ability to obtain energy through normal sources changes? I think that's important. I think that speaks volumes about your thoughtfulness and your plans for operations. So again, I would echo what you just said, Jeremy. Once again, another category where we had some great plans, very thorough and detailed, and we had some applicants with no acknowledgement of these criteria whatsoever. So that's reflected in my point allocations. There's no further discussion. We'll move into scoring. Energy Efficiency Stash Ventures LLC, I've awarded 5 points. Mr. Clerk?
Let me get back to my sheet.
Yep. I gotta.
For Stash, 6.5.
Mr. Chief?
I have 4.
On the category of Energy Efficiency Carry Investments LLC, I've awarded 9 points. Mr. Clerk?
8.5.
Mr. Chief?
I have 8.
On the category of Energy Efficiency Loom Cannabis Company Broomfield, I've awarded 10 points.
Yep.
Mr. Clerk?
10.
10.
On the category of Energy Efficiency Loom Cannabis Company North Mission, I've awarded 10 points. Mr. Clerk?
10.
Mr. Chief?
10.
On the category of Energy Efficiency House of Fire Provisioning, I've awarded 6 points. Mr. Clerk?
7.
Mr.
I
Chief?
did 7 too.
On the category,
I'm sorry.
is it a 7?
Yeah, it's a 7. I gotta wait until you ask me. It's like not. It's like answering not in the form of a question on Jeopardy. I'm sorry.
Yeah, Mr. Clerk, could you mute his mic until he's been acknowledged by the chairperson?
Right.
On Energy Efficiency GC Flint LLC, I have awarded 6 points. Mr. Clerk?
7.
Mr. Chief?
7, sir.
On the category of Energy Efficiency Northeast Services, I have awarded 0 points. Mr. Clerk?
6.5.
Mr. Chief?
I did 3.
On the category of Energy Efficiency CGO Services LLC, I've awarded 0 points. Mr. Clerk?
6.5.
Mr. Chief?
I did 3.
On the category of Energy Efficiency Green Peak Industries, I've awarded 0 points. Mr. Clerk?
2.5.
Yeah, I did 2.
2. On the category of Pure Relief and category of Energy Efficiency, Pure Relief and Union LLC, I've awarded 9 points.
Yep.
Mr. Clerk?
8.
Mr. Chief?
I did 9.
All right. So, conversation on this energy efficiency topic. Anything to add now that we've scored?
Solar fixtures, Energy Star stuff. It's a matter of putting it together and putting it in your application. You don't have to reinvent the wheel here.
Yeah. I guess I wasn't very charitable when there weren't details.
Yeah.
I wasn't going to do a word search and say this word appeared and therefore you get points. I need to know what this means. I need to know that you know what this means. And so I think my point allocations and maybe some of our differentials speak to my approach in that regard.
Yeah, I'm trying to. The one that sticks out is I am at a 6.5 on N East and CGO. I don't know what I'm trying to remember what I saw and what you didn't see in that one, or if there's enough of a differentiation to make it matter, because they were certainly on the lower end of my scale or the middle of my scale comparatively.
There was no detail.
Yeah, that for me, there was acknowledgement, but no, it was just extremely vague and non-committal.
Mhm.
And I
Yep.
just felt like this was a time to be clear and committed to what your plans are. And so I just wasn't comfortable awarding points on the factor of the level of detail that was provided to us.
And I guess I was just comparing it, and I did see it there, maybe not in the level of detail that you were looking for it, but I think that's probably where I landed on those.
Yeah.
I don't know
Well,
that it's enough of a factor to move it or not.
We average out to Paul, basically. So
Right.
I think that's our median member score is our average score. So I think we're probably doing something close to right. Any other discussion on energy efficiency? Can I have everybody check your scores before we move forward?
Mine are good.
Mine are good.
All right. Our final category is infrastructure impact, including the utilization of green infrastructure or low impact development design principles to manage stormwater, and the provisions of non-motorized transportation infrastructure in excess of city requirements. This is a 10-point category. Any discussion on this category?
Same comments as before. Some did very, very well. Some were lacking here.
Yeah, I think for me, I looked at the kind of proportionality. It was clear which applicants had attempted to determine what city requirements were. If they were planning to propose an excess of non-motorized transportation infrastructure. It was also clear which applicants understood what green infrastructure and low impact design principles are versus what stormwater design is.
Mm-hmm.
And a underground storage tank for stormwater is not a low impact development or green infrastructure principle. A retention basin by itself is not a bioswale. There are things, there are characteristics that make something green infrastructure, and just dealing with stormwater to meet the minimums of our stormwater ordinances is not in and of itself, to me, satisfying this criteria. So that'll reflect in my point allocations. Mr.
You might have discrepancies then.
Well, we can talk about that because I think, and maybe we should talk about that now. For me, I'll start with the positive. I felt that House of Fire provisioning and GC Flint both understood green infrastructure and made accommodations for multiple methods of treating and dealing with stormwater that are low impact. They also understood our minimum non-motorized transportation requirements and had the most extensive plans to address non-motorized transportation of any of the applicants. Certainly some of the applicants are proposing to do a degree of low impact development strategies when it comes to their stormwater, but perhaps not to the extent that other applicants did. And then some applicants' plans are either just didn't have the details, or either fell short of or only met the minimum requirements of the city. As I mentioned, one of the applicants proposed a bioswale, but it's really just a retention pond. And a retention pond and a bioswale, those are two different methods of dealing with stormwater, and there were critical details missing to convince me that the plan was truly green and low impact. So anybody else have anything to add on this category?
I guess when I got rid of low impact, and when somebody puts in a tub under the ground to hold water to prevent flooding, I looked at it as a great thing. But I understand now what you're saying on, yeah, I guess digging up a parking lot. Yeah, it ain't low impact. So I guess
Yeah.
that was a different perspective or interpretation. I get it.
Yeah, I mean, a low impact generally for stormwater means that you're doing point treatment. So where the rain falls, the water is given a
Mhm.
chance to be dealt with as close to that point of contact with the ground as possible. So, you know, a classic example would be a green roof, where the rainwater, rather than having to be collected in a gutter into a downspout into something else, you know, the roof itself can act as a collection mechanism, or maybe it goes into gutters, but it goes into a cistern that you can use to water your plantings on your site. So instead of discharging the water, you collect it and you use it for purposes on site. You know, the benefits of that are typically you get a better quality of water. Typically, you can prevent greater
Mhm.
impact to the existing kind of gray infrastructure, the pipes under the ground, because you're putting less water into them. You know, in terms of resiliency, we've all lived through a flood in recent memory.
That's, yeah.
And we've watched our neighbors to the east struggle with really an event significantly more catastrophic than our own. And so being able to think outside of the normative box on, I think, stormwater treatment is really critical. We've also got a river here in our community that we care about that hasn't always had the been treated as well as it could have by
Yeah.
our community, and hasn't always been able to be used as the resource it is by our community because of that treatment. And so anyway, that was just my approach. Like I said, any stormwater treatment is good over the alternative of no treatment.
True.
But there were clearly plans that were thinking ahead about how do we do this in the most environmentally friendly, infrastructure friendly way possible, and that's how my point shook out.
I don't think we're going to be done talking about this after these scores.
Well, let's go ahead and get started then, and we will have some conversation after we're done. On infrastructure impact, Stash Ventures LLC, I have awarded 5 points. Mr. Clerk?
2.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
2.
2. Mr. Chief?
I did 4.
On the category of infrastructure impact, Carry Investments LLC, I've awarded 1 point. Mr.
Yep.
Clerk?
5.
Mr. Chief?
I did 4.
In the category of infrastructure impact, Loom Cannabis Company Broomfield, I've awarded 6 points. Mr. Clerk?
8.
Mr. Chief?
I did 8.
On the category of infrastructure impact, Loom Cannabis Company North Mission, I've awarded 6 points. Mr. Clerk?
8.
Mr. Chief?
8.
On the category of infrastructure impact, House of Fire Provisioning, I've awarded 10 points. Mr. Clerk?
8.
Mr. Chief?
8.
On the category of infrastructure impact, GC Flint LLC, I've awarded 10 points.
I did 8.
Mr. Clerk?
8.
Mr. Chief?
8.
Don't make me warn you again. I'll have the clerk mute you.
I didn't say anything.
You said 8 before I called on you.
I must be mumbling. Sorry. Go ahead.
On the category of infrastructure impact, Northeast Services, I awarded 5 points. Mr. Clerk?
2.
Mr. Chief?
I did 8.
On the category of infrastructure impact, CGO Services LLC, I've awarded 0 points. Mr. Clerk?
2.
Mr. Chief?
I did 1.
On the category of infrastructure impact, Green Peak Industries, I've awarded 1 point. Mr. Clerk?
0.
Mr.
I
Chief?
did 2.
On the category of infrastructure impact, Pure Relief and Union LLC, I've awarded 6 points. Mr. Clerk,
9.
Mr. Chief.
I did 5, sir.
Right. I don't think we had as much discretion or discrepancy there as we were thinking.
That was pretty close.
I think we're all in a good range. So everybody, why don't everybody take a second, review your scores, and while you do that, review the scores of your fellow committee members, and then we can come back together and see if there's any discussion on those point allocations.
Do you want us to review the entirety of each entity scores? Is that what
Let's
you're saying?
start with reviewing your scores in this category.
Okay.
And yes, we'll do a full review of your scores for each applicant.
Mine are good.
Mine are good.
All right. Any discussion on the infrastructure impact category?
They're not bad. I mean, as far as
Now you get that median, and they're pretty close for median score.
Yeah, I mean, I think within that category, there's it's your approach to the plan as presented, and each plan had a variety of different levels of detail and different levels of attention to the criteria standard. And I think I'm comfortable. I'm certainly not uncomfortable with my scores or any of the scores that were allocated by my fellow committee members. Knowing what I read, how I read the applications, I don't see anything that causes me alarm with anyone else's scoring. There's no further discussion on this category. I would ask if each member of the committee could please review. Yes, Mr. Chief.
I just want to put out there, did you guys find it difficult when an applicant had a number of different businesses operating currently, and you looked at what they presented and it wasn't, it may not have scored well or as high as you would think for a company that has established businesses, but that whatever they're doing, it seems to work because they have established businesses. Does that make sense?
It does. I mean, as I said at the outset, I think in terms of the background of these applicants, we have folks who have extensive marijuana and non-marijuana business experience. And I think we don't have any applicants here who have no marijuana industry experience. And in doing, my due diligence, it seems like most folks have a good track record of operations elsewhere, as they should, because this is obviously an emerging market and there's great incentive to be attentive to your operations. But yeah, I will say, overall, my greatest surprise in this review process was that some applicants didn't address some of the criteria.
Yeah.
And I felt clearly there were some criteria that were black and white, but most of the criteria presented an opportunity for the applicants to make a case about their plans. And some applicants failed to do that on different metrics. So.
Okay.
I agree.
All right, has everyone checked their point entries for their applicants in each category?
No, I can do that now.
Okay, if you guys could do that before we go to ranking, I want to ensure that our entries are correct before we do the final ranking.
0, 5, 4, 5. Yeah, mine are good.
I just need another minute.
No problem, Mr. Clerk.
It took a little longer with those fractional points I got myself.
Yeah.
It looked a little harder with all those decimals. Okay, I'm good.
All right, if we're settled on points, I'll begin with ranking with our top point total. And if the committee members could help me and ensure that my math is correct, our candidate applicant number 1 would be Loom Cannabis Company, Broomfield.
Mhm.
Applicant number 2 would be Loom Cannabis Company, North Mission. Applicant number 3 would be House of Fire Provisioning. Applicant number 4 is Pure Relief and Union LLC. Applicant number 5 is GC Flint LLC. Applicant number 6 is Northeast Services. Applicant number 7 is Carry Investments LLC. Applicant number 8 is Eco Services LLC.
Yep.
This is being harder, not easier as I get. Applicant number 9 is Stash Ventures LLC, and applicant number 10 is Green Peak Industries. Can you folks confirm that I have those rankings
Looks correct to me.
correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
All right. All right, with the conclusion of this ranking, I just once again want to extend, I guess, first, my appreciation to this committee. Understanding this was a tremendous amount of work, a lot of pressure, and not an easy job. And I know we are all hoping that the decisions made today will be reflected in quality operations in our community for years to come. And so thank you all, thank you both for participating in this committee and all of the work that's gone into getting to today's scoring process. And just once again, thank you to all of our applicants. We appreciate the time and energy that you and your teams have put into this process. Some of you will be continuing to work with through the retailer licensing process. Others of you, as I said, we will continue to be working with on other marijuana licensing programs. And we wish you all, in either case, all the best, and hope to continue to work with you in the future. Are there any additional comments from the committee before we move to adjournment?
I would say, was just going to say that I thank the two of you for being on the committee as well. And thank you, Jacob, for taking the role of chairperson there. I think it was a smooth meeting. This scoring could have been a little bit tricky, and I think it was handled well. So thanks for doing that and kind of stepping us through that process. So thank you both for participating. It was certainly a lot of work. Like you said, there was many late nights where I was reading and rereading and going back and forth and, comparing one to another and going back over my points and making sure that I found everything that should be awarded. So there were some great proposals, and I'm happy that all of our applicants were able to apply, and look forward to them working with the city of Mount Pleasant moving forward in the top three, kind of moving through that next step process, next phase. I will say, I unfortunately won't be able to continue in the process. Today is my last day with the city. So those of you who were on the call that I've talked to in the past, I'm actually taking a position as the Clare City Manager. So I will be moving up to Clare, just up the road. But I have had many a conversation with Jacob, and Jacob and I have worked hand in hand on both the medical side and the recreational side. But some of the things that I would be moving forward with on some of the letters and stuff, you'll probably see those come from Jacob. So look for his name on some of those letters that you've been receiving from me. But I appreciate all the time and effort that all the applicants put into this, and wish you all the best as you move forward through the process.
And I'd like to echo some of those same comments. I really appreciate my fellow selection committee members. I really appreciate you, Jacob, your organization, your attention to detail in this. Your talents seem endless to me. And Jeremy, it's been an honor working with you, and I know our roads will cross down the line. It's an honor actually being the last one to serve in a public meeting with you. So for the city of Mount Pleasant, you're going to have plenty of public meetings up there.
That's for sure.
Yeah. So I wish you all the best.
Thank you.
And lastly, I do want to thank all our applicants. I know there's a numerical score that are associated with how things came out. Again, that's the process that was put into place, selected and designed. But by no means does it mean that these aren't good or fantastic applicants. This was tough, very tough. And I remember when this was all being designed, I was like, I want to be on that committee. I want to be on that committee. And after doing it, it's not that I hated it, but this is, I like it, but it is tough. So I just thank everybody and you guys. I appreciate it.
Wonderful. Well, if there are no further comments from the committee, I will welcome a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All right, all in favor of adjournment, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.